Welcome to the Fire Sprinkler Podcast with Chris Logan. If you're like me, we just don't have time anymore to get all the answers we need to do our job. It doesn't have to be that way. The Meyer Fire Toolkit was created to help get your time back. It's the downloadable software that helps you get sprinkler design answers fast. The new system estimator now even lets you estimate hydraulic demands of a system in seconds. Get the highly rated Meyer Fire Toolkit that's used by over 300 fire sprinkler companies worldwide. Go to meyerfire.com/podcast for a special offer exclusive to the Fire Sprinkler Podcast listeners. That's meyerfire.com/podcast to get your time back.
Like and subscribe.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Fire Sprinkler Podcast. On this episode, I have John and Kacee. They were involved in developing what is to be released today, actually, as long as I press the button at the right time, a new certification that's available from NFPA, the WBITM Water-Based Inspection, Testing, and Maintenance Certification. Before we get into what that is and what it's all about, let's get some introductions rolling. John, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks, Chris.
So, John, what is your involvement with NFPA and kind of where did this new certification come into play?
Sure. So I'm one of 3 certification program managers at NFPA, and we design, build, and manage the 17 currently certifications that NFPA has. We divide it up among us. I manage things like Certified Fire Protection Specialist, our electrical safety certifications, and am co-managing, soon to be handing off the WBITM certification, which is the new one we're here to talk about today. I've been with NFPA for about 10 years, 8 years with the certification program. And, that's pretty much what I do day in and day out is manage the certification programs from building the exams to maintaining the eligibility criteria. And one of the important functions that we do with those programs is to make sure that they're current and relevant to the communities that they serve is we get volunteer subject matter expert panels to help build them and to help maintain them. And the subject matter expert panel we got for WBITM included Kacee, who we have with us today.
And Kacee, why don't you tell me a little bit about your involvement with this certification and what you do?
Yeah, so I've been in the fire protection industry now probably, I'll say 9, almost 10 years. I actually started as a degreed engineer in like kind of the consulting world. Did that for about 5 years. And then about 4.5 years ago is when I got brought on with Johnson Controls Tyco as a technical trainer up in their Cranston, Rhode Island facility. Is actually where I am today. So doing hands-on training for contractors, AHJs, designers, insurance companies, anybody in fire protection that has interest in the hands-on training. And then about 2 years ago, I actually made the switch into sales. So I'm now a territory manager. I handle what they call Western New England. So Rhode Island, Connecticut, Western Mass, Vermont, and then a little bit of upstate New York. But when I was in the training center is where I got introduced to NFPA and Matt Klaus and the certification team, and actually sat on a certification advisory group for the Certified Water-Based System Professional, CWBSP. Yep. And then from there is where I got brought on to this one.
Awesome. We refer to Matt Klaus as the Tiger King. Due to
that's
his video
accurate.
with NFSA. Now referred to as the Tiger King from now on. I'm going to scratch his name out of every standard and just write Tiger King for as long as he's involved. Matt's a good guy. I had a good conversation with him last year as well. So why don't we start with what is the WBITM and what's it going to bring to the table?
Sure. So WBITM is, that's our shortened initialism for the Water-Based Fire Protection System Inspection, Testing, and Maintenance Certification. We didn't want to have a whole alphabet soup in there, so we took a few of those words out for the initialism. But basically what it is a professional certification for people who are involved in inspection, testing, and maintenance of sprinklers and all the other, related water-based fire protection system programs or systems.
So it's a certification for sprinkler fitters or inspectors that are just looking for another basically an accreditation training program to ensure competency?
We do. It's not available yet, but soon we will have a complete certification learning path training package, which will have everything from exam prep to a lot of the relevant NFPA 25 training and some ancillary training on some of the related codes and standards. But for the most part, ours or anybody's existing NFPA 25 training is the most relevant thing for it, because it is primarily based on NFPA 25, and also there is an expectation of an understanding and a working knowledge of the foundational codes and standards like 13, 13R, 20, and pretty much all of those that are around the design and foundational knowledge pieces that you need to know to be able to do the inspection, testing, and maintenance.
And that's kind of one of the, like, if you look on social media, on Facebook and stuff like that, requirements of a proper ITM NFPA 25 inspection, testing, and maintenance procedure is one of the probably most talked about and highly argued about things out there. Is this required in NFPA 25? Is this required? Do I have to actually flow water? Do I have to do this? What if the sprinkler's too far off the wall? The certification program is going to kind of help you outline and learn all of these things.
Yeah, I mean, well, the training leading up to the certification is where you really, build that base of knowledge. Most like any certification program, it really revolves around a demonstration of your knowledge and skills. So the learning and the training and everything you do leading up to what is ultimately an exam is where we land with the certification. So we have some eligibility criteria for the program, and once you meet the eligibility, then you take an exam, and upon passing the exam, then you gain the certification. Which once you gain the certification, like any real certification, you have to sort of maintain continuing education and recertification points on a point system.
So probably looking at a similar thing with the CFPS, where you have to get continuing education units to maintain that license.
Right. There's education, there's membership in professional organizations. There's a whole bunch of ways to earn points in the point system, but yeah, very similar to that. And in most industries, when you have certification programs, you have a similar sort of setup where you have to maintain currency and relevance in the field.
Yeah, there's a lot of programs. Our apprenticeship and journeyman certification here in Ontario, that's one of the recommendations I've been trying to make for years is can we have a requirement for continuing education? Because I think from the installation side of things, switching gears just slightly, from the installation side of things, I think that's one of the things that's lacking in the industry, is from a fitter or installer technician standpoint, is maintaining, updating with the standards and the codes and the requirements is kind of lacking everywhere across the board, union, non-union, etc.
Sure.
A lot of people are out there, the passionate fitters and designers and installers are always maintaining and growing their knowledge, but there's just things that I'd like to see a little bit different. Maintaining a license is one of the things. So with your online study path that you guys are going to be making, similar setup to the CFPS, where it's going to be basically a chapter by chapter walkthrough on identifying certain things that you need to do?
Yeah, it's really going to break down. If you look at the materials for our WBITM certification, we have what we call an exam content outline, which is basically an outline of all the subjects and all the topics, and broken down again in an outline format. So you have your broad topics that we call domains, and that's inspection, testing, maintenance. We also have documentation, we have safety, we have workflow management. So those are the other topics, and within those topics there are sort of subtopics, or as we call them, subdomains, and it'll sort of walk through each one, all the tasks, all the subject areas, all the content that you really need to know to be able to be successful when you go for the exam.
Okay. Kacee, when you first got on with this, is this the first program that you've helped NFPA develop as an SME?
No, so the first one was the Certified Water-Based System Professional. And they were both so completely different. So the CWBSP, that's more your designer, right? We talk about Matt Klaus being the Tiger King, and
Tiger King. Yep.
so he had to actually like review those questions, and he came back to the CAG and said we actually stumped him on a few. So that was a nice little pat on the back.
Absolutely.
Whereas this CAG, we all know how gray area NFPA 25 can be, right? So like we all know, like you were saying before, sprinkler 4 inches off the wall. I don't do metric, so sorry.
That's okay. Neither do I.
But as an inspector, you go in and you see it, that's wrong by the installation standard.
Right.
But per 25, you can't write that up as a deficiency, right? You can write it as a recommendation. So I think it really challenged the CAG into really thinking like, okay, does this meet the scope of NFPA 25, or are we crossing that line into, NFPA 20, NFPA 24, NFPA 13, any of the design standards? Are we crossing that line? So it was definitely, there were many long discussions on, well, should we allow this question? But if we allow this one, then we have to allow this one. But, do we allow it out of here? Do we pull this in as a body of knowledge, or do we just solely do it off of 25? So it was certainly an interesting process.
Yeah, an interesting process. Did you take any of the things that you learned from developing the certification with CWBPS? I think I said that right. The Certified Water-Based System Professional Certification. And what kind of things were you able to apply to developing this course, and kind of how did it help?
So really, because that CWBSP was, I'll call black and white, very cut and dry, like pull it out of the standard. This is how you apply it. This is where we can reference it back to. When it came to writing the items for this exam, we all know, I'm trying not to give examples because we don't want to give any answers out, but we all know that, if I can't think of an example right now, but there's things that are in the standard that we know this is how it's supposed to be. But if you go back to try to find a section for it, it's very difficult.
Right.
And I think that was where it helped working with the group is, hey, look, when I was on this CAG, we had to apply it. Like if we're writing an item out of this domain and this subdomain, we have to be able to link it back to a section in the standard. And I think that was kind of where I could translate that over to the new one and say, okay, well, yeah, we all know what you're trying to write is accurate, but to cover NFPAs,
how do I reference it?
How do I reference it? Because should someone appeal a question, NFPA has to be able to stand behind it and say, well, it came out of this section. So.
Right. The difficulty would probably be when you're looking at sprinkler valve inspections, where some stuff is noted as inspect in chapter 6 of sprinkler, I think, and then actually the requirements and
13.
requirements and stuff like that are in chapter 13.
Yeah.
Well, and one thing that's important to note is that, just like Kacee was describing, we're not, while we want to reference the codes and standards, the exams and the programs, both with CWBSP and with WBITM, they're not exams on the codes and standards. They're role-based programs and exams. Right. So they're set up for the person who is practically doing the job in the field, in a role. So we have to apply it as, how the person is going to apply this in the field versus strictly an academic exercise on the text of the code.
What are the goals with developing, like what's the end game for this certification? Obviously it's to kind of improve the inspection, testing, and maintenance procedures and the fitters and the technicians out in the field that are doing it. But what is the end accomplishment that you guys are trying to reach with this?
Well, I think ultimately the goal of it is to offer a professional credential for people who are doing this in the field, and there are others in the field as well, similar professional credentials. But we want to be able to have that distinction where an employer or a jurisdiction says, you need to demonstrate knowledge, skills, and abilities at a certain level within this field to be able to be qualified for a job, to be able to do the job, in our jurisdiction. So what this does is gives that yardstick that it's with the eligibility criteria somebody has to have 5 years of experience, direct experience in the field. And then they have to be able to take the test, which is pretty rigorous. And through that test, demonstrate that they have that knowledge and skill. So what the certification does is it makes it so that the employer or the AHJ doesn't have to, test the person themselves. They don't have to quiz them and say, do you really know this? They've already met that benchmark of proficiency and knowledge by having the certification.
Right. So moving on a little bit, let's talk a little bit about the eligibility for people. Can any Joe Blow who looks at sprinkler gauges once a week take this course, or is there any kind of prerequisites that are required prior to signing up for this?
So good question. We do have some eligibility prerequisites for it. Among those, well, really the foundation of it is you have to have 5 years of direct experience with the inspection, testing, and or maintenance of water-based fire protection systems. So you have to have at least been working peripherally, with the systems. And then there is an supervisor attestation form. So basically this form is used for your supervisor, your employer, to say that they have direct firsthand knowledge of your skills and abilities and proficiency with all the subjects out of that exam content outline that tells you what all topics are covered by it. So
Okay.
so somebody has to be able to have some actual experience, and somebody willing to put their name on the line and say, yes, as their supervisor, I can verify this person's is at the appropriate skill level.
Right. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like you don't want, some certain tests that are based entirely off of 100% book knowledge. You could have any Joe Blow that is good with studying come in, challenge an exam, and have a certification that they're not strictly or really involved in.
Right, absolutely. And since it really is a public safety issue, and since credentials like this are used to qualify, to determine who is qualified to do a job, you certainly don't want somebody who doesn't really have that requisite knowledge and skill to be able to get the credential and be able to be put in a job role where safety could ultimately be in jeopardy.
Would there ever be a situation where NFPA would revoke certification based off of morality, unjust due diligence, something like that? Like where if NFPA is a reporting process or something like that, where somebody can say, hey, this guy's got a certification, he's not doing his inspections, he's the term used is kind of pencil whipping a sprinkler inspection, driving by and throwing the paper out the window. Is there anything like that to kind of keep the...
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, we have that for other programs. We've done similar things for some other programs, and as part of the application process, there is a box you have to check on the online application that says you've read the Code of Conduct and Ethics. And so there is a Code of Conduct and Ethics, and violation of that Code of Conduct and Ethics is grounds for revocation of your certification.
Cool. That's good to hear. I like hearing stuff like that, not because I want to hear people lose their license, but I want people to know that if you're not doing your job properly, there are repercussions.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially around where I'm from in Ontario, there's been a lot of, there was a couple major things, and I don't know if you guys have heard of any of the stuff going on up in the Toronto area where the term pencil whipping would be, to put it lightly. Yeah, there's no way a guy can do 200 inspections in a day, but he did, and had the paperwork to prove it. Yeah, there was a lot of stuff. I'll send you the paperwork. It was pretty insane. Certification equivalency, like what kind of, without kind of cutting anybody else down, what are we kind of looking to level this up to? Are we looking to level this up to like a journeyman sprinkler fitter inspector certification sort of thing? Like
sure. And as I said earlier, there are other similar certification programs, some with different tiers. Right now, this program is only a single tier program. We may look at adding a sort of an intermediate tier in a future, a future iteration. Not exactly sure when that would be, so it's not directly on the horizon. But we've kind of gone with the top tier of the other equivalent or related certifications, and we have an active process where we're going to AHJs and getting them, a lot of times in their legislation, it will say you need XYZ certification or equivalent. And,
Right.
we're getting them to sign off as equivalent, much like our CWBSP program. We've gotten quite a few states and jurisdictions to agree that it is equivalent to the, sort of the standing incumbent programs. So just if somebody's looking for an alternate path, or they want to kind of stick with NFPA because maybe they're a fan of NFPA products and other certifications and that sort of thing, and want to go NFPA route as opposed to one of the others, then and in every functional way that we can identify, we are equivalent to, the other standard programs in the field.
Right. It's just a matter of making sure that you've had that experience under a qualified. Is there any chance down the road? I can't see it happening, but you turn it into an apprenticeship where somebody with the NFPA or WBITM signs off on the next person coming through?
It's a good question. We haven't really looked at that, but ultimately the person's still going to have to, meet the same, take the exam and still meet the same level of credentials. But if we do, like I said, there's sort of an intermediate level that we haven't really covered yet, since this is a more, journeyman to advanced level certification. What if somebody only has 2 years experience in the field, and they want to have some sort of credential? So there will probably be something along those lines, but that's all speculative right now.
Where, if somebody is interested in taking the certification, which I mean, I'm going to apply for it today. Where does somebody find the certification, and how do they take the test?
Okay, well, so the website's going to be nfpa.org/WBITM, much like all of our certifications. It's nfpa.org/ the initialism for the program, and that'll take you to that particular program's page. You can also do nfpa.org/certifications, and it'll take you to a general certifications landing page that has links to all of them. Or just from the nfpa.org page, you can filter around and find it under training and certifications. You go there and it sort of has all the basic information. It again describes the eligibility criteria. There's a candidate handbook that we strongly encourage everybody to download, and that has the information in much greater detail, and it has that exam content outline so you can look at all the topics and look at all the subjects that'll be covered. And then let's say ultimately you decide that you want to go for it and you are eligible. You go through the application process, pay your fee, and then you'll get an eligibility number that you then take to Prometric. Prometric is our test delivery partner, and there are Prometric test centers around the world. And you use that eligibility number, which will then allow you to schedule the test. The test is taken at Prometric test centers around the world. So you've probably done those kind of tests where you go to a professional testing center, and it's a computer-based test. And you'll have a scheduled time and place, and that's where you go.
The handbook or the regular standard are both allowed for the test, or do you recommend the handbook over the the standard?
Strictly the standard, but here's one of the nice things about this program. It's our first one that we've done this for, where all of the references that are necessary are available electronically within the test environment. So it's an open book test, but on screen you'll be able to pull up NFPA 25, you'll be able to pull up 13, 16, 20.
Okay.
Those will all be available in the test environment for you as references.
If I can just hop in, I think it's worth noting that even though if it's open book, this was definitely something we had conversations about when we were talking about how long the exam should be, or how many items it should be. Well, if it's open book, then anybody could just take it. Well, no, because as we all know, there's been, everybody's had those certifications that you sit and you take and you just kind of Control F and search it, right? Well, I believe we don't have the find function available for this exam. And if you have to research all 140 questions, the time's going to run out more quickly.
Right.
So that's just something worth noting, is that it's not a very when we were making it, we wanted to make sure it wasn't one of those certifications that someone could just sign up for, search a document, and pass, and it could be any Joe Schmo.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. That was a similar conversation I had when I helped with developing the sprinkler fitter certification program in Canada, the Red Seal exam. I helped review that, and it was something where I think we should change. So you need a 70%, you need a 70% to pass. I think 60% of the questions are able to be found in the book, and the rest are trade knowledge, something you need to have experience on to know,
Right.
and even less than that, just so that experience counts just as much as somebody who can flip through a book, because
Right.
there are a lot of people that can flip through a book and pass
And
the
we
test.
all sat as CAG members, we all sat and physically took the exam as well as part of the development. And there were some that, all of us could just A, B, C, D, figure it
Yeah.
out. But then, there's a handful that you're like, I think I know the answer, but let me look that one up just in case.
Right.
But the joke was too, it was like, we don't want to offer a control F function or a find function,
That's
because
right.
someone will type in like inspection or sprinkler and it's going to return 1,000 results, and
That's
it's not
right.
going to be very helpful.
You almost
Right,
want to.
right.
You almost want to
Right?
put that control F just to throw the people off that don't really know what they're doing, and they just
Right.
want to use that control F function.
And then they're just
Right. Well, the
Right.
real key with the providing the references is they're there in case you need it. But if you have to look up every question, there's no way you're going to have time to finish the test.
What's the time limit on the test?
It's so there are 140 questions, and it's a 2.5-hour exam.
Wow.
So you have what is it? Just a hair over a minute per item, I believe, if I do the quick math in my head.
Yeah. Something like that.
So yeah, and and some of them involve images, and there are hotspot questions where you may have to select the right area on a picture. There are others where you have to look at the image, or you may have to read a scenario and apply knowledge to the scenario.
Sure.
So again, there's all of that time involved. So if you have to look up a large chunk of the questions without already kind of knowing what you're doing, or at least where to find it in the reference books, you're never going to come up with a good enough result on the exam, and you're not going to be able to finish it. So it's sort of designed to be that way, so that you can't just look up all the answers and be successful.
Similar questions, I'm assuming, to the CFPS, if anybody listening has taken that exam, where it's they'll give you a question that's a paragraph long, but you only really need the first and second sentence of the question to answer it, right?
It could be, yeah.
Yeah.
And CFPS is another one like that, where if you don't have a good foundational knowledge, then you're never going to be able to, even though it's open book, you're never going to be able to be successful.
It's open book, but it's two books that are not.
Right. The NFPA Fire Protection Handbook,
Yeah.
to call that a book is pretty generous. The Oxford English Dictionary is also technically a book.
So are the encyclopedias.
Yeah, that
I
exam
had,
was fun.
it was the toughest exam I've ever taken in my life.
For sure.
And I talked to a buddy of mine, just passed it on Monday, another guy up here in Canada, just challenging ourselves, learning new things. And he took the exam on Monday and he passed it. And I said, what did you think of the exam? He was like, hardest test I've ever taken in my life.
Even taking the primer course and being in the field for as long as I was at the time, I took the full 3 hours, and I left there and I had no idea what happened to the last 3 hours of my life.
Yeah. Yep. Same.
Right.
Awesome. If somebody wants to get more information, nfpa.org/WBITM. Kacee, John, thanks for coming on the podcast to help release this product. Hopefully we get a bunch of people signing up today. Kacee, just before we leave, which number certification are you?
I obviously want number 1, but I think they might do it alphabetically, so I might be smack dab in the middle.
How many people are involved? If I sign up at 12:01 on the 19th, will I be number 50, 51? I want a low number here.
There were
You'll be in the teens.
on the CAG.
I'll be in the teens. Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome, guys. Again, thanks for coming on. Thanks for supporting the podcast, and thanks for letting me help release this new certification.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure thing. Thanks, Chris.
Hey everyone, this episode of the Fire Sprinkler Podcast is done. If you liked this episode, leave a review, comment, or hop over to my social media pages and let me know. Just search Fire Sprinkler Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Don't forget to hashtag Fire Sprinkler Podcast and anything you think I should know about or see. If you have any suggestions for future episodes of the Fire Sprinkler Podcast, email info@firesprinklerpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. Take care.